Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming together to immerse ourselves in both a great inherited body of wisdom and a great fellowship that together we contribute to that great inherited body of wisdom. So this week we are in Parshat Tazria, in the book of Leviticus, begins in chapter 12, and we will read through the English translation of the entire portion. I'll share with you a focused study about it, and then we'll open it up for our collaborative collective conversation about it. If you'd like to go ahead and unmute at this time, together we can recite the blessing, giving thanks for the opportunity of this moment. Baruch
Adonai,
Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot divrei Torah. Thank you, God, for the opportunity to immerse ourselves in words, deeds, and relationships of Torah. I'll share with you the opening verses of our portion, and then I'll offer others an opportunity to read as well. Again, we begin the book of Leviticus, chapter 12, with verse 1. Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the Israelite people thus. When a woman at childbirth bears a male, she shall be unclean 7 days. She shall be unclean as at the time of her menstrual infirmity. On the 8th day, the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised. She shall remain in a state of blood purification for 33 days. She shall not touch any consecrated thing, nor enter the sanctuary until her period of purification is completed. If she bears a female, she shall be unclean 2 weeks as during her menstruation, and she shall remain in a state of blood purification for 66 days. June, would you like to read a little bit starting there at verse 6?
Thank you, Rabbi. On the completion of a period of purification for either son or daughter, she shall bring to the priest at the entrance of the tent of meeting a lamb in its first year for a burnt offering, and a pigeon or a turtle dove for a purification offering. He shall offer it before the Lord and make expiation on her behalf. She shall then be clean from her flow of blood. Such are the rituals concerning her who bears a child, male or female. If, however, her means do not suffice for a sheep, she shall take 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons, one for a burnt offering and the other for a purification offering. The priest shall make expiation on her behalf, and she shall be clean.
Thank you so much. Let me invite Margot. Would you like to read a little bit at the very start of chapter 13?
Thank you. The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, when a person has on the skin of his body a swelling, a rash, or a discoloration, and it develops into a scaling affection on the skin of his body, it shall be reported to Aaron the priest, or to one of his sons the priest. The priest shall examine the affection on the skin of his body. If hair in the affected patch has turned white, and the affection appears to be deeper than the skin of his body, it is a leprous affection. When the priest sees it, he shall pronounce him unclean. But if the white discoloration on the skin of his body, which does not appear to be deeper than the skin, and the hair on it has not turned white, if the priest shall isolate the affected person for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest shall examine him, and if the affection has remained unchanged in color, and if the disease has not spread on the skin, the priest shall isolate him for another 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest shall examine him again. If the affection has faded and has not spread on the skin, the priest shall pronounce him clean. It is a rash. He shall wash his clothes, and he shall be clean. But if the rash should spread on the skin after he has presented himself to the priest and been pronounced clean, he shall present himself again to the priest. And if the priest sees that the rash has spread on the skin, the priest shall pronounce them unclean. It is leprosy.
Thank you so much. Richard, would you like to read a little bit starting at verse 9?
Sure, thank you, Rabbi. When a person has a scaly affection, it shall be reported to the priest. If the priest finds on the skin a white swelling which has turned some hair white, with a patch of undiscolored flesh in the swelling, it is chronic leprosy on the skin of his body, and the priest shall pronounce him unclean. He need not isolate him, for he is unclean. But if the eruption spreads over the skin so that it covers all the skin of the affected person from head to foot, wherever the priest can see, if the priest sees that the eruption has covered the whole body, he shall pronounce the affected person clean. He is clean, for he is turned all white. But as soon as undiscolored flesh appears in it, he shall be unclean. For when the priest sees the undiscolored flesh, he shall pronounce him unclean. The undiscolored flesh is unclean, it is leprosy. But if the undiscolored flesh again turns white, he shall come to the priest, and the priest shall examine him. If the affection has turned white, the priest shall pronounce the affected person clean. He's clean.
Thank you. And Dave Leb, would you like to read starting at verse 18?
When an inflammation appears on the skin of one's body and it heals, and a white swelling or a white discoloration streaked with red develops where the inflammation was, that person shall report to the priest. If the priest finds that it appears lower than the rest of the skin and that the hair has turned white, the priest shall pronounce the person impure. It is a leprous affection that has broken out in the inflammation. But if a priest finds that there is no white hair in it, and it is not lower than the rest of the skin, and it is faded, the priest shall isolate that person for 7 days. It should spread in the skin. If it should spread in the skin, the priest shall pronounce the person impure. It is an affection. But if the discoloration remains stationary, not having spread, it is the scar of the inflammation. The priest shall pronounce that person pure.
Thank you, Dave. And Jim, would you like to read starting at verse 24?
Thank you, Rabbi. When the skin of one's body sustains a burn by fire, and the patch from the burn is a discoloration, either white streaked with red or white, the priest shall examine it. If some hair has turned white in the discoloration, which itself appears to go deeper than the skin, it is leprosy that has broken out in the burn. The priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a leprous affection. But if the priest finds that there is no white hair in the discoloration, and that it is not lower than the rest of the skin, and it is faded, the priest shall isolate him for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest shall examine him. If it has spread in the skin, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a leprous affection. But if the discoloration has remained stationary, not having spread on the skin, and it is faded, it is the swelling from the burn. The priest shall pronounce him clean, for it is the scar of the burn.
Thank you, Jim. And David and Susan, would you like to continue there, beginning with verse 29?
Thank you, Rabbi. If a man or a woman has an affection on the head or in the beard, the priest shall examine the affection. If it appears to go deeper than the skin, and there is thin yellow hair in it, the priest shall pronounce the person impure. It is a scall, a scaly eruption in the hair or beard. But if the priest finds that the scall affection does not appear to go deeper than the skin, yet there is no black hair in it, the priest shall isolate the person with the scall affection for 7 days.
And the priest shall see the affection on the seventh day, and here the skull has not spread, and there is not yellow hair in it, and the skull's appearance is not deeper than the skin, then he shall shave himself, and he shall not shave the skull. And the priest shall shut in the one with the skull 7 days a second time. And the priest shall see the skull on the seventh day, and here the skull has not spread in the skin, and its appearance is not deeper than the skin. Then the priest shall identify him as pure, and he shall wash his clothes, and he shall be pure. But if the skull has spread in the skin after his purification, and the priest will see him, and here the skull has spread in the skin, the priest shall not inspect for the yellow hair, he is impure. And if in his eyes the skull has stayed the same, and black hair has developed in it, the skull has been healed, he is pure, and the priest shall identify him as pure. Thank you so much. Robert, would you like to continue there at verse 38?
Yes, thank you. If a man also or a woman have in the skin of their flesh bright spots, even white bright spots, then the priest shall look, and behold, if the bright spots in the skin of their flesh be darkish white, it is a freckled spot that groweth in the skin, he is clean. And the man whose hair is fallen off his head, he is bald, yet he is clean. And he that hath his hair fallen off from the part of his head toward his face, his forehead bald, yet he is clean. And if there be in the bald head or bald forehead a white reddish sore, it is a leprosy sprung up in the bald head or his bald forehead. Then the priest shall look upon it, and behold, if the rising of the sore be white reddish in his bald head, or in his bald forehead, as the leprosy appeareth in the skin of the flesh, he is a leprous man, he is unclean, the priest shall pronounce him utterly unclean, his plague is in his head.
Thank you so much. And now let me write to Jay, would you like to read a little bit starting at verse 45?
45. Thank you. As for the person with a leprous affection, his clothes shall be rent, his head shall be left bare, and he shall cover over his upper lip, and he shall call out, impure, impure. He shall be impure as long as the disease is on him. Being impure, he shall go apart. His dwelling shall be outside the camp. When an eruptive affection occurs in a cloth of wool or linen fabric, in the warp or in the woof of the linen or the wool, or in a skin or in anything else made of skin, if the affection in the cloth of the skin, in the warp or the woof, or in any article of skin is streaky green or red, it is an eruptive affection. It shall be shown to the priest, and the priest, after examining the affection, shall isolate the affected article for 7 days.
Thank you so much, Jay. I'm going to invite Catherine, if you'd like to pick up there at verse 51.
Thank you, Rabbi. On the seventh day, he shall examine the affection. If the affection has spread in the cloth, whether in the warp or the woof, or in the skin, for whatever purpose the skin may be used, the affection is a malignant eruption. It is unclean. The cloth, whether warp or woof in wool or linen, or any article of skin in which the affection is found, shall be burned, for it is a malignant eruption. It shall be consumed in fire. But if the priest sees that the affection in the cloth, whether in warp or in woof, or in any article of skin, has not spread, the priest shall order the affected article washed, and he shall isolate it for another 7 days.
Thank you, Catherine. Justin, would you like to continue there at verse 55?
Thank you, Rabbi. Then the Cohen shall look at it after the lesion has been washed, and behold, the lesion has not changed in appearance, and the lesion has not spread. It is unclean. You shall burn it in fire. It is a penetrating lesion on the worn or new article. But if the Cohen looks at it after it has been washed, and behold, the lesion has become dimmer, he shall tear it out of the garment, out of the leather, or out of the warp and woof, the threads. And if it appears again on the garment, the warp or woof threads of any leather article, it is a recurrent growth of a lesion. You shall burn it in fire, the article upon which the lesion is found. But if the garment, the warp or woof threads, or any other leather article which is washed, and then the lesion disappears from them, shall be immersed a second time, and it shall be clean. This is the law of a lesion of tzara'at on a woolen or linen garment, warp or woof threads, or any leather article to render it clean or unclean.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. That's our entire Torah portion for the week. If you have a copy of the study sheet, I invite you to bring it out now. I'd like to share with you a focused study about it. And just before we started our session together, I was really reflecting on this portion and how I had been thinking about it this week. And I took kind of a mental step back and placed it within a context of Leviticus as a whole, as I'm reading it this year. And in a sense, I was thinking of the book of Leviticus as being a response to the experience at Sinai. The experience at Sinai was this enormous eruption of the source of all life into this dimension. And in particular, our sages in their midrashim indicate that eruption into this dimension was so powerful that it effected, in a sense, a power blast that sent the Israelites backwards about a mile from the foot of the mountain. And it was so powerful that it caused them to, if not die, at least go into a kind of state of a comatose state for a while. So just this is, in a sense, whether the moment at Sinai is an actual historical event that occurred at a specific geographical place, what it is certainly describing is some kind of encounter with the power of the universe. And in a sense, what happens from that moment that it's described in chapter 19 of the book of Exodus, what happens over the next 20-some chapters is a way to address that powerful eruptive moment. Is there a way to achieve a structure, a framework that would allow that encounter with the source of all life to become part of everyday life in a way that wouldn't be as disruptive and concussive and mind-boggling as apparently it was being described as that moment of Sinai. And so that's what really, one way to look at the whole Mishkan enterprise, which is what the rest of the book of Exodus describes, can be seen as a way of trying to design a structure that would take that power and enable a people to be able to encounter it every day without it being so dangerous, if you will. And so here we are in Leviticus. Leviticus then becomes, if you will, an instruction manual for primarily the priests on how to conduct services that would allow that power to enter into the community in a way that would be safe and beneficial for the community. So one issue that kind of comes up that for me, at least as I'm reading Leviticus, is does that power then remain something that is wild and potentially destructive and at least disruptive? Or is there a way to make that power become somewhat managed and controlled? Does that power remain a source of mystery and wonder, the way it seemed to be at Sinai? Or does it become explained and understood? And so I think there's a tension here. And I think Leviticus, in a sense, as we've been encountering it so far, is sharing with us that tension. There are ways in which it does become, or there's an attempt for it to become managed and predictive within Israelite daily life. But as we've been encountering so far, there is still this element in which it's being shared that it's not completely under control. It's not completely understood. There is a way in which it remains wild and a mystery. And we're going to get into that in just a moment. But as I'm saying that, I just want to have us all reflect on our personal relationships with others. When we're attracted to someone, are we attracted to them because we know them and we understand them and we have complete comprehension of them? Or are we attracted to them because there's something that we don't understand about them, that we desire to know? Are we attracted to the mystery or to the comprehension that we have of the other person? So that's just a little side piece, perhaps on a more interpersonal level, just for us to consider. So let me deal here with this week's portion in particular. So here in this week's portion, I see one of these kind of cautionary tales from the voice of Torah that is in a sense saying, not everything can be controlled. Not every aspect of this can be grasped. There remains something wild and untamed and a bit of mystery. And we've seen that in our previous portions in Leviticus, and here I see it again. And that is how our Torah portion opens up, and the very name that our Torah portion has, Tazria. So on our study sheet, we have number 1. When a woman, Tazria, and bears a male, she shall be tameh 7 days. She shall not touch any consecrated thing, nor enter the sanctuary until her period of purification is completed. So I didn't translate the word Tazria, which gives the name for our portion, but the word Tazria comes from the Hebrew root zara, which means to sow, scatter seed, produce seed. So in a sense, this woman is bearing seed, and that's the term that's used for is in the process of giving birth to a child. And apparently this being in this state of Tazria causes her to be tameh, which I think in my portion was translated as unclean. And when we say unclean, tameh here is being used to describe not a physical condition or a moral condition. It's a spiritual condition. It's a condition that means that that person it's inappropriate to enter into certain dimensions, namely the dimension of the Mishkan, the inner part, to enter into the Mishkan. We'll talk about that in a moment. But I just want to raise this issue of this word Tazria. The word Tazria, in another form, was part of the story of creation, and that's also here in number 1. And this is from Genesis chapter 1, verse 12. the earth brought forth vegetation, seed-bearing plants, in Hebrew, mazria zara, of every kind, and trees of every kind, bearing fruit with the seed in it, zarobo. And God saw that this was good. So in the story of creation, this state of being Tazria, of being full of seed and about to give birth, is seen as a beneficial thing, a good thing. And it even says, and God saw this was good. So there's a confounding, at least for me, as to why in the story of creation is being in that state of fructification, if you will, considered a good thing. And here in Leviticus, it appears as if it is somehow disturbing of the woman's condition, and that disables her from being inside the Mishkan or of touching any object that is part of the Mishkan. So that, to me, is a bit of wonder and confoundment. The wonder and confoundment doesn't end with this notion of Tazria. It continues with the second significant portion that we read in this week's portion Tazria, and that's discussed here in number 2 on the study sheet. As for one who is Zaroa, his clothes shall be rent, and he shall call out, Tameh, Tameh. He shall dwell apart, his dwelling shall be outside the camp. So this condition of Zaroa, Zara'at, that too is kind of strange. It is a condition that also sets this person apart. It is also one that it calls this person into a state of being tameh, just as the woman who was bearing a child went into a state of being tameh. And what's curious about this state of zara'at or zaro'a here is the word itself, because I tried searching down what is the etymology of this word, and I couldn't find it. And I thought, oh, well, maybe I'm just very bad at looking through the Hebrew dictionary. And so I went in search of some scholarship to see if some scholars could tell me what's the origin of it. And there is no real good scholarship that is clear and certain about what the etymology of this word is. And indeed, Jewish tradition just kind of skips over that and goes into the condition itself, and basically attributes this as a supernatural condition that arises from one's bad behavior, particularly that of gossiping. Because here I have the closest I could come up with in terms of the root, possibly, of this word zaroa, zara'at, is this tzadi resh ayin combination, but that means to throw down, to prostrate. And then we have this other configuration from the same letters, zir'ah, which means hornets. So what is this condition? Does it have something to do with being prostrate? Does it have something to do with bees and buzzing and hornets? So it's a complete mystery, which interpretive tradition has basically skipped over the root meaning of this word as well. So here we're full of this mystery and trying to understand what it's all about. So in terms of trying to get at a deeper understanding, I went to a couple of different routes. If you turn over our study sheet, the first route I went to was a scholarly route. And it's from an article that's about a book by Mary Douglas, about a book that Mary Douglas was an anthropologist. She wrote about the book Leviticus. So here is from an article by Sarah Ridner that was in Mosaic magazine in 2017 about what Mary Douglas said. According to Mary Douglas, Leviticus designates as sources of impurity, not things that are morally sullied, but things that are by their very nature are unbounded and cannot be hemmed in. Leviticus prohibits in order to protect.
The new mother is barred from entry to the temple because the boundary-breaking experience of childbirth cannot translate neatly into a covenantal temple framework. Childbirth is a process in which pleasure and pain, life and death, purity and impurity are intermingled and become inextricable from each other. Now, as we've seen in Leviticus, Leviticus is keen on drawing distinctions and separations and boundaries. And the experience of childbirth, at least as Mary Douglas is presenting it to us, is one that breaks boundaries, that combines all these different dimensions of our lives and doesn't really fit within that temple framework, as Sarah Rinna describes it. Well, that's a scholarly approach which I assimilate and appreciate. And then I went to what I'll call a spiritual pathway to try and understand what's happening here. And that comes from Richard Rohr. Richard Rohr is a Franciscan priest and the founder of the Center for Action and Contemplation in Albuquerque. And he wrote in an article, "Mystery is not that which is unknowable, but that which is endlessly knowable. Living inside such endless knowability is finally a comfort, a foundation of ultimate support, security, unrestricted love, and eternal care." So now I'm putting these things together. So now what I'm seeing is, on the one hand, post the Sinai experience, whatever that was and however that was experienced by whom and when, there is an attempt to try and create a framework for making it a part of everyday life. That attempt to make it a part of everyday life, there's a danger in doing that. One danger is to think that you can tame that experience, that you can control that experience, that in a sense you can domesticate that experience. And so we have these moments, if you will, of subversion of that exercise, of that enterprise, which Leviticus is in effect warning us about and saying there are also these dimensions and levels of mystery, lack of control, confusion, confoundment. And here, Richard Rohr is telling us that, and that's not such a bad thing. And in a way, mystery should not be considered that which is unknowable and should be, in a sense, feared or make us feel diminished in some kind of way. But mystery should be considered as something that is endlessly knowable, and that one is invited into that mystery, and to be invited into that ongoing, lifelong mystery actually provides, to live within it, provides a sense of comfort, support, security, unrestricted love, and eternal care. So the third way I had of understanding this is now to turn to the art world. And I did that through, entered into that through a quote from the Belgian surrealist artist René Magritte, who wrote, "Art evokes the mystery without which the world would not exist." Here is this artist who was, as all surrealists were, drawn to the world of the unconscious, the world of dreams, the world that was other than the world that we see daily with our eyes. And he is telling us that mystery, that is something that enables the world to continue to exist, and therefore should not necessarily be something that is resolved, solved, feared, but is something that should be wondered upon and explored. And so I'd like to share with you now the painting, which is on the front page of our study sheet. This is a painting by Gustav Klimt. Gustav Klimt was a great painter in Vienna in the very beginning, the end of the 19th century, very beginning of the 20th century. And for those of you who are not familiar with Klimt, I urge to experience more of his work. He is someone who was, in his lifetime, at least by the authorities, the official authorities for the art world in Vienna at the time, was considered a heretic, an outcast. He started his own movement called the Secessionist Movement to challenge the official art movement of Vienna. There's a lovely book called The Lady in Gold. I invite you to read that by Anne-Marie O'Connor. It's a book primarily about one of his paintings, a portrait of Adele Bloch-Bauer, who was a Jewish socialite in Vienna at the time. Klimt, his primary patrons and supporters were the middle and upper middle class Jewish citizens of the city of Vienna. So while Klimt was considered a kind of an outsider to the official art world, today he's considered one of the great modernist painters of all times. And in addition to the book, The Lady in Gold, you might consider watching the movie, The Woman in Gold, which is a movie that's primarily about the Nazis when they confiscated his painting of the portrait of Adele Bloch-Bauer, and how eventually a woman in Los Angeles who was a relative of Adele Bloch-Bauer was able to recover the painting by suing the government of Austria. So wonderful book and a wonderful movie. So here's this painting that he began in 1903 and concluded in 1907, which is actually the same year that Klimt painted his portrait of Adele Bloch-Bauer. And it's part of his series of paintings that he did using a lot of gold. And this is called Hope 2. And in Hope 2, what we have is a woman who is Tazria. She is about to give birth. And you can see her pregnancy here in the middle of the painting. Her abdomen is protruding. And if you look carefully, perhaps on an even better image that you can get online, you'll see right at the top of where her robe is, there is a kind of a gray area that's protruding out, and that is a skull of death. And then further down at the hem of her garment, there are images of three women, and they have their heads lowered and their arms raised, and the woman herself has her head lowered. So it is a wonder as to whether what's happening here is a moment of joy and celebrations that she's about to give birth, or whether the presence of the skull of death is an indication that this child might die. The women who are portrayed at the bottom of her hem, are they bowing their heads and praying for thanks that a child is about to be born, or are they in mourning because they have foreseen that this child is going to die? So here, and this woman's breasts are exposed. So what Klimt has done is he has brought together sensuality and a sense of also fear and pain, the possibility of life, the possibility of death, celebration and mourning. He has brought all of those together. And in a sense, what's happening in this painting is the mystery of it all. Life and death, pain, pleasure, a celebration, mourning, it's all there on this canvas. And so this is what in the Museum of Modern Art, which owns this painting, in a bit of commentary about it, they say this: here, birth Death and the sensuality of the living exist side by side, suspended in equilibrium. And perhaps this is also going back to our scholarly approach from Mary Douglas, where she has said, childbirth is a process in which pleasure and pain, life and death, purity and impurity are intermingled and become inextricable from each other. And Richard Rohr, in his spiritual access to this moment, says, mystery is not that which is unknowable, but that which is endlessly knowable. And to live within it is what provides us comfort and a foundation of ultimate support. So this may be, in a sense, this interruption that the book of Leviticus is providing us through Torah's wisdom, that just as we may think that we are able to craft a system that allows us to access the power that presented itself at Sinai, and allows us to create a predictive system that if we do these things, and these will be the outcomes. If we bring these offerings, then we'll be assured of rain and a good harvest and so forth. And the Torah is saying, through this bit of this element that it has introduced onto the canvas of this mystery, said, there remains this element of mystery, and that's not a bad thing. And it may be that when we're drawn to one another as well as to God, we are drawn not just by that which we know, grasp, and consequently have the capacity to control and manipulate, but that we're also drawn to that which is a mystery, that which we can't control, which we can't manipulate. But if we allow ourselves to be drawn into it, into a relationship with it, we find comfort, love, and fulfillment. It's the mystery of it all. So with that, I'd love to know what you encountered, what you saw in our reading and in our painting. And if you raise your hand, I'd love to call upon you. Dave, go ahead.
Okay, when I read through the Parsha, I took it very personally this week. Because last January I had a growth behind my ear, and they did a biopsy on it, and they found out it was cancer. Well, this Tuesday, a couple of days ago, they went and excised the skin around there and examined it, and it was cancer-free. So I was kind of thinking I had the same thing as whoever had this skin blemish when the Torah was written. Fortunately, I wasn't exiled from camp or anything like that, but so far it looks good.
Dave, Baruch Hashem, we are thrilled by your wonderful news. We love you, and we're so glad that this is the outcome, and we love you. Okay, thank you so much for sharing that wonderful news with us. Thank you. So, let me call upon Rose. Go ahead, Rose.
Thank you, Rabbi. First of all, I have a comment, then I have a question. I'm trying to figure out the dermatologic, being a physician, I'm not a dermatologist, but trying to figure out what these things were, especially infections of cloth and stuff. I'm not sure, what those were. But I also have a question because they don't mention what happens if the woman, if there's a stillbirth or the baby dies right after birth. I guess that's not significant, but what if there's a stillbirth? How long is the woman impure?
Yeah, what do you think? From having read, what is the aspect of this experience that renders the woman to be in this state that requires her to be some degree of isolation? Do you think it is?
It may not matter what what happens with the baby, but because they're focusing on the woman, and the process of childbirth is the same whether you have a living child or one who is stillborn. So maybe it's the same. I don't, I'm just putting this out there to say, is there a difference? Because then there's also the aspect of death that, you know, she's been associated with a dead person.
So I go back to the painting because it's all there in the painting. You've got the possibility of life, and you also have the possibility of death. It's all present there.
Well,
And
for the mother too. I mean, you know, but,
yeah.
but if you have a stillbirth, just the baby is dead.
So what you got me to think about is the whole process of bearing a child and the birth and whatever the outcome, the extent to which that takes us into this realm of the uncontrolled, the mystery of life. So I go back to the sense of mystery and the extent to which we don't have ultimate control over all that. And to the extent to which some of us respond to that with a sense of fear and anxiety, and a desire ever more to try and figure out how to control all this. And then others have a sense of just of surrendering, if you will, to the sense of the awe and wonder of that whole process. So I think it opens up all those possibilities. And I guess for each of us, it may be calling for, we may have a different response to it. So let me call upon David, Susan, and Robert. Go ahead, Dave.
Two things. The first is I can't remember who I heard this from, but it has stuck in me ever since. And that is, he said that the word mystery should not be interpreted to mean forget about it, as in, oh, it's a mystery to me, and move on to something else. That the word mystery is actually an invitation, a recognition that there's something you don't understand, and you should turn your gaze, your mental gaze, your actual gaze in that direction. Which I think works with your lesson today. The second thing I wanted to say was that I turned the
Painting on its side.
the art on its side, and I did it in a high resolution version, you know, where the program has a rotate right 90-degree button. So I did it, and suddenly it jumped out at me as the lady is lying down on a flat surface in her kind of orangey robe. Next to her is not just a skull, but a body in a differently patterned robe. And then the women at her feet, their expression suddenly changed into something else. But so to me, at least for some moments, it was a picture of a lady lying down next to death, but about to perhaps, God willing, be a partner in producing life.
Wow. You know, David, how thrilling that you engaged in that experiment with altering the orientation of the painting. Because the painting that I mentioned earlier that he did also in 1907, the portrait of Adele Bloch Maurer, which is, I don't know if you can see it here. This painting as well is confounding as to its orientation. If you get a chance to look at it online, it's unclear as to whether she is standing or sitting or lying down. And that may be in part Klimt's intent there as a way to disillusion us of our capacity to understand exactly what we're looking at, even as we are enwrapped in looking at it, to be enthralled by this vision, even as we're not sure if we're looking at a person who's sitting, standing, or lying, or in the cases, as you pointed out, whether this person is standing, lying flat on her back, or exactly what the orientation is. But we're drawn into it because of the sensuality of it. We're drawn into it because of the drama that's happening there. And perhaps that sense of being enticed is part of the richness of any mystery. And and the question is, do we want to try and solve the mystery, or do we just want to be in the mystery as well? So thank you for bringing all those wonderful things up.
I have a question for half of us, which is this sensuality of a half-dressed woman about to give birth a male reaction, or is also a female reaction?
Okay, lovely to throw it out there. I'm going to allow others to have a response. And let me call first upon Robert and Jay, and then we'll see if others want to jump in as well. Robert, please.
Well, thank you again for a lovely evening. And I always appreciate your finding a piece of art that's so apt for the selection. You know, we've been talking a lot about physicians and healing, and Leviticus focuses a lot this section on the skin and so forth. And I was thinking, if I were Jewish and I were speaking with an atheist, and the atheist said to me, so how can you prove that Moses was a teacher from God? Now, the same thing would be true if they asked me about my Baha'i faith. And it occurred to me that they come as physicians, spiritual physicians, but not only for our spiritual, moral, and ethical life, but also for the social aspects of life, material affairs, and then our own personal well-being. So when I put this part of Leviticus with the other parts of the Torah, what I see is Moses having come down as a divine teacher, a divine physician, with lessons for the individual, the collective, for the spirit, for the material, for individual well-being, even down to our health. Because if we look at Aaron, Aaron was like a physician at that time. I don't see anything in the Torah closer to a physician than Aaron. And here he is doing that function as per Moses. So that's the first thought I had. And then, you know, mystery is such a loaded word. I love all the comments. I think the best word to describe mystery is mystery. But one of the things that occurs to me, so as this, you know, subject came up and we saw the definition of mystery, I'm always a little leery of any definition that doesn't mean that it isn't good or has value, but we have two eyes, and I haven't found any truth that doesn't require two perspectives. And so I'm thinking of subatomic particles. The essence of everything, including subatomic particles, is unknowable. We don't understand the essence of grass. We don't understand that spirit that drives creation. But what is knowable is the signs from those things. And I love the idea of mystery being an ocean. You know, how did it get there, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But we have drops we can touch. So just a few small thoughts. And thank you again. I always enjoy Thursday evening.
Thank you so much, Robert. Those rich comments as well. Thank you so much. And let me call upon Jay, and then I'll get to Dave. Yeah, Jay.
First of all, in response to David's poll, I find the image to be intriguing sensual would be lower in the top 10. However, whether this young lady is standing or reclining, which thank you, I'm the one that used to do that. I didn't do it this time. It's absolutely, these people's posture is definitely lending to them lying there with her. However, if you look at the proportion of the top of the woman's torso and then the rest of her adornment, she is going to give birth to much, 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 much more than just a small baby child. There has to be much, much more to what she is going to bring into this world.
Wow, I hadn't thought, wow, thank you for that, Jay. That's very rich. Thank you. And Dave.
What I was going to say is when I look at I guess it's a garment she is wearing, but it looks like there is a scroll on the right-hand side. Did anyone pick that up? If you go up from the bottom, the second face, and then go to the right near the edge,
Yeah.
looks like there's a scroll there that could very well be a Torah.
Wow.
You
Yeah,
catch that when I enlarged it a bit?
you did enlarge it, you say?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, and that's what you saw there was something that looked
It looks like a scroll, and it could very well be a Torah scroll.
Uh-huh. Wow. So,
Did you pick that up? It's right next to that. I guess it's a hand, which is right outside the border.
right.
Definitely.
Yeah, that's definitely a hand. Oh, I see what you're talking about now. The kind of the very edge of that hem, right?
Right.
Next to the hand, right?
It's about a third of the way up from the bottom.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Who knows? I don't know. That's very, very intriguing. Thank you. So let me other comments as well. Richard here.
Yeah, just one little thing. There's a little piece in there that I remember from last week about anybody who's Tameh's got to go outside the camp. And that had to do with the ashes. And it had to do with being in the real world, which is no mystery, it's a mess. And that childbirth is a mess, that there's something very earthy and important that we don't try to escape. And I think also when you say that we predict everything, we do go through growth. And here we're offered maybe the beginnings of science, maybe the beginnings, as someone said, the priests now are having the role of physicians and trying to distinguish between what's going on with the body and making decisions about who has to come back and so forth. That this is adaptation to this new power that's been unlocked for us. So I think there's an awful lot about birth going on in Leviticus and about the nature of the birth of our consciousness and our relationships with one another, to have a community that does accepts both the need for ashes. It was good enough for the king of Nineveh, and it's good enough for the priest to go get a little dirty after a while and be defiled by it. And it's important to give anima her due, and not have to be involved in ritual behavior after she's done this tremendous task and needs to be left alone for a while. That's how I see it.
Thank you. And to let me just ask Susan or David, did you have an additional comment as well?
Yeah, I just had a bounce off Mr. Richard, who's profound. And that is, it suddenly struck me when he was talking about mess, is at the core, the foundation, the underneath, the center of this construction of boundaries and rules and lines and restrictions and carefulness is about the messiest thing I can imagine, which is a slaughterhouse. I don't have any way to resolve that, but it just really struck me. I think Rose actually raised that a few weeks ago.
So here we are, we're in this book, which of all the books should be the clearest, because it has virtually no narrative going on, no human action going on that we then can probe and wonder what's happening. It seems to be a manual of some kind of how to conduct rituals that will help us to cohere with the source of all life. And yet, as we have been discovering, embedded within this manual are all these trapdoors, in a sense, leading us down into confoundment, confusion, and mystery. And the one thing that I know for sure is to proceed through a world of mystery, it's best done when one has good companionship, a sense of trust with those around one. And I'm very grateful for the kind of companionship and trust that we have with one another in this community of interpretation and study and growing wisdom. I want to thank each and every one of you. God bless you all. I look forward to our next gathering. Be well. God bless. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Very much.
Good night.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
God bless everyone.
Well.